I knew something was wrong the moment the forfeiture notice fluttered on the cabin door like a warning flag. Bright orange, nailed and crooked, stamped with the smug authority of the Clearwater Ridge HOA, a group I never joined, never met, and never agreed to pay a single dime to. Yet somehow, this mysterious HOA had decided my dream lake cabin, the one my grandfather built with his own hands, now belonged to them. The hook sank deeper when I saw the second sign. Unauthorized structure, subject to removal. My jaw locked. Unauthorized? This cabin had stood on the edge of Mirror Lake since the 1950s. It was older than the HOA itself, which only formed 8 years ago when a group of retirees with matching windbreakers decided they needed more control over the shoreline community. I lived 2 counties away and visited once a month, so whatever power trip they were on had gone unchecked, until now. As I tore the notice from the door, a golf cart rolled up. Inside was a woman with sharp sunglasses and an expression that said she corrected people for fun. "You can't remove that," she called out. "It's official." "So am I," replied, holding up the deed. "Owner." She stepped off the cart with the kind of confidence only HOA presidents or people who think they invented Pinterest usually have. "I'm Marla," she said. "And unfortunately, this structure violates our shoreline aesthetic standards. We voted to reclaim it." "Reclaim?" I repeated, stunned. "You can't reclaim something you never owned." Marla smirked like she'd been waiting for that line. "Actually, the new map says otherwise." Then she handed me a folded survey, brand new, printed in color, with a boundary line that magically sliced right through my property and labeled my grandfather's cabin as HOA Zone C. It looked official, until you noticed the HOA logo was stretched and pixelated, like someone dragged it too far in Microsoft Word. "You made this," I said. "We commissioned it," she corrected, which wasn't an answer. What hit me hardest wasn't the audacity. It was the timing. My father had passed only months prior, making me the sole inheritor of the cabin. I hadn't even finished sorting through his old fishing gear, and now this stranger was telling me she planned to bulldoze the place? "No," I said firmly. "This cabin stays." Marla tilted her head. "Then I hope you're ready for court, because we're filing tomorrow." Her words echoed across the lake, bouncing off water that had reflected 3 generations of my family's summers. I stared at the cabin, fists tight. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one, just not the one they expected. The courthouse in Clearwater Ridge looked more like an oversized lodge than a place where property rights were decided. Wooden beams, stone walls, and the faint smell of cedar. All oddly comforting, considering I was about to face an HOA that believed clipboards counted as legal authority. Still, as I walked up the steps with my folder of documents tucked under my arm, I felt the weight of my father and grandfather behind me. This wasn't just land. It was legacy. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter. On the left bench sat Marla and 3 HOA board members, each dressed in the same matching navy vests. They looked like a cult that worshipped bylaws instead of deities. Marla flashed me a grin so smug it could have been trademarked. "You made it," she said sweetly. "Let's hope you brought a real deed this time." I ignored her and took my seat. My attorney, Ava Tran, a sharp-eyed property lawyer who rarely blinked, leaned toward me. "They filed 3 claims," she whispered. "Boundary reassignment, aesthetic violation, and non-compliance with community ordinance." "There is no community ordinance," I muttered. "That's why this is going to be fun." When the judge entered, everyone rose. He looked like the kind of man who had seen enough nonsense to recognize it instantly. After the formalities, he turned to the HOA side. "Ms. Marla Kensington," he said, "you're asserting the defendant's cabin rests within HOA jurisdiction based on a new survey. Is that correct?" Marla stood confidently. "Yes, Your Honor. As of our updated mapping, the property falls within Zone C, therefore subject to our regulations." Ava didn't even wait for permission. "Your Honor, this so-called updated mapping was conducted by an uncertified contractor hired directly by the HOA. We have proof the previous county-approved survey places the cabin well outside their jurisdiction." She presented a large, crisp, official survey stamped and signed by the county assessor. It wasn't pixelated. It wasn't crooked. It wasn't the product of someone fighting with their home printer. Marla's smile twitched. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Kensington, why does your map not contain certification marks?" "It's pending review," she replied quickly. Too quickly. Ava handed the judge another document. "We contacted the county. There is no pending review." The judge held both maps side by side, one professional, one obviously fabricated. A slow silence filled the room. Finally, he looked at Marla. I'm going to need a very good explanation. Her confidence cracked like thin ice. Still, something told me the HOA wasn't done. People like Marla never quit after the first failure. They regroup, replot, and come back swinging. And sure enough, they did. I thought the fake map fiasco would finally put an end to the HOA's nonsense. But Marla was the kind of person who treated setbacks like detours. 2 days after the hearing, I arrived at the cabin to find a bright yellow, emergency safety violation notice taped across the door. This time it claimed the structure was hazardous and uninhabitable. Attached underneath was a bill for mandatory safety inspection services, totaling $2,480. I tore it down, feeling my pulse spike. Uninhabitable was a joke. The cabin might have been old, but it was sturdy. Grandpa built it using timber so thick it could probably survive an earthquake. As I stepped onto the porch, I noticed something else. The lock had been scratched and bent, like someone tried to force it open. A cold realization washed over me. They weren't just trying legal angles anymore. They were trying to create problems to justify taking the cabin. I called Ava immediately. They left another violation, I said, and someone tried to break in. Don't touch anything else, she warned. I'm heading there. While I waited, I walked the perimeter of the cabin. At the back window, I spotted muddy footprints. Small, distinct, likely from the HOA's maintenance crew. They must have assumed I wouldn't show up on a weekday. When Ava arrived, she photographed everything. This is targeted harassment, she said, and illegal entry. But the real gut punch came when we returned to the front yard and saw Marla approaching in her golf cart like she owned the entire forest. She didn't even look embarrassed. You shouldn't be here, she announced. This property is under emergency review. No, I said sharply, stepping toward her. You don't get to vandalize my cabin and then pretend you're protecting it. Her mouth twitched. We received anonymous reports of foundation instability. Anonymous, Ava repeated flatly. Yes, Marla said, several. I crossed my arms. Let me guess, written in your handwriting? Instead of answering, she glanced at the bent lock and shrugged. If your cabin is falling apart, that's hardly our fault. Ava stepped in, voice cool as lake water. Actually, trespassing and falsifying violations will look very interesting when presented alongside your forged map. Marla's posture stiffened. You can't prove anything. We don't need to prove it, Ava replied. We just need to show enough for the judge to initiate an injunction. That word finally made Marla flinch, but before she left, she leaned close to me and whispered, You're not going to win. We always win. I watched her roll away, the small tires crunching gravel like punctuation marks. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a cabin. It was about power, and she had just declared war. The injunction hearing was scheduled faster than anyone expected, probably because the judge had already sensed something rotten long before we returned with photos, timestamps, and a pile of new emergency notices the HOA kept plastering onto my cabin like aggressive bumper stickers. By the time we entered the courtroom again, Marla looked less like the self-appointed queen of Clearwater Ridge, and more like someone praying the ground might open and swallow her whole. The judge began without pleasantries. Ms. Kensington, this court has received evidence of unauthorized entry, fabricated violations, and attempts to forcefully assert jurisdiction without legal authority. You were warned after the last hearing. Now explain yourself. Marla stood, her vest stiff and zipped to her chin. Your Honor, all actions taken by the HOA were in the interest of community safety. We believed the cabin posed risks. Ava rose slowly. Your Honor, the defendant's cabin has passed every county inspection for decades. Meanwhile, Ms. Kensington's crew left tool marks on the lock and muddy footprints beneath the window. We have photographs, and we have statements from neighbors who saw HOA maintenance personnel on the property during weekdays when the owner wasn't present. The judge raised an eyebrow. Statements? Ava handed him a stack. 3 separate households, all willing to testify. This time, Marla didn't speak. She just swallowed. The judge flipped through the papers, his expression tightening. Ms. Kensington, not only does your organization lack jurisdiction over this property, it appears you attempted to create a false pretext to seize it. This is, to put it mildly, unacceptable. A silence so heavy spread across the courtroom that even the wood paneling seemed to tense. The judge continued, The court hereby declares the Clearwater Ridge HOA has no authority over the defendant's property. The fabricated map is stricken from record. Furthermore, due to evidence of harassment and attempted unlawful entry, the HOA is issued a cease and desist order. Any further interference will result in civil penalties. A whisper rippled through the room. Someone from the HOA board muttered, "But—" before another member elbowed him quiet. Marla sat down slowly, her confidence collapsing like wet cardboard. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. But I looked at her, and I realized something profound. People like Marla don't fear losing power. They fear being exposed as never having had it. When the gavel fell, Ava nudged my arm gently. "Congratulations," she said. "Your cabin was always yours. Now it's legally bulletproof." We walked out of the courthouse into the crisp lake air. For the first time in months, I wasn't fighting. I was free. My grandfather's cabin stood safe. My father's legacy stayed intact. And the HOA learned a lesson they'd never forget. Sometimes the underdog doesn't just win. Sometimes the truth wins bigger. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this wild HOA story, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more crazy real-life cabin and neighborhood drama. Drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with an over-the-top HOA like this? And give this video a like if you love seeing justice served.